at an excessive level. To answer the question, are we fluoridating our water? Yes, we are complying with federal requirements. We fluoridate at the lowest level that is required on the scale by the US EPA. And periodically, I think it's important that the EPA investigate the benefits and the risks of that fluoridation to make sure that it's in line with the science, especially as we get access to better dental health care. I think we need to have more individual dental health care and implementation of fluoride at a dental visit. And that may be that mechanism of getting fluoride delivered may be able to be just as effective as fluoridation. But that's a scientific question that needs to be studied. But these regulations have been substantially the same since the 70s.
So where do you put the fluoride into the water?
It happens through the water treatment process. So we have water treatment facilities throughout the district in Orinda, Walnut Creek, and San Pablo. And one of the stages of water treatment is adding the fluoridation to the drinking water.
Do we have any further questions? If anyone wants to speak up or raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask. Sonia.
Hi, I've read about, I can't remember the article now, but I've seen ideas about installing solar panels on top of canals in order to shade them. And I was wondering if you knew anything about that. Yeah.
Great question. Yeah. So I've seen the same articles that you have. And I think it's great to prevent that water loss from those canals. That's good from a statewide perspective. Those aren't our canals, so EBMUD does not have any maintenance of those facilities that we control, but it's something that we're observing. We've looked at a number of different alternatives for how do you cover a water body and maybe even have solar generation, in conjunction with that. It hasn't made sense on any of our own facilities, but it does look like it really makes sense on some of these canals to prevent water loss and to generate renewable energy. It takes about 20% of California's electricity is spent pumping water over the Tehachapi Mountains to get to parts of Southern California and Eastern California.
Andy, if we have a bunch of terrible fires this summer, how does that affect our water and how much of it might be used to fight fires? What would be the effect of all of that?
Yeah, well, I'm really saddened by how devastating climate change has made our fire situation. It's become an annual occurrence where it seems that every year we have nearly, another devastating wildfire season, and it's almost something that we can predict at this point. So that's really disturbing that's our current situation. And what I would say is, EBMUD has been very successful in being able to keep the water on without a drop missed. So we make sure to have backup generation facilities at every pumping plant to make sure that we're able to provide reliable water even during a public safety power shutoff situation. So we have been able to keep the water on, not miss a drop. In terms of our emergency storage, we do have an emergency storage facility at Lafayette Reservoir. And so that's available for helicopter-based emergency vehicles to pick up water from the sky and dump it, on a wildfire, probably in the local zone. I don't think that facility would really be useful for further north, like where most of the fires have been happening. But if we were faced with a wildfire situation, that's abutting the Berkeley Hills and the Tilden Park area, in the grasslands in Contra Costa County, that Lafayette Reservoir would be a site that would be looked to. We don't have drinking water needs out of Lafayette. It's planned primarily as a backup reservoir and a fire control resource.
So was there any damage to the Mccullum Valley area where you're collecting the water from the last year's major fires that were near there? They were mostly a little north of that, right?
Right, not last year. There was a fire. I forget the name of that fire, but a few years ago there was a fire that came very close. Yeah, what was that, Michael?
Rim fire.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, the rim fire came very close to significantly affecting the Mccullum watershed. We were able to deploy staff. We put sandbags in front of the riverbank to prevent the ash from getting into the river before it was too late. So we were able to prevent the bulk of the ash from getting into the river, and we had no noticeable quality impacts to our water. So I'm thankful that we had emergency responders on site that were able to do that. But these are costs. These are adaptation costs that I think we need to be thinking about. Why do we have to do this? Who should have to pay for this? And what more do we need to do to be resilient? Because I think we do need to be thinking about, is clear cutting sustainable the way it's currently being done? I would say no. Do we need to be investing more during wildfire season to be able to prevent our rivers from getting inundated, with ash? So these are the kinds of issues that I'm, taking into consideration. I see a question from Ruby McDonald. Ruby, yes, your hand is up.
Can you hear us, Ruby? I don't think Ruby can hear us. So maybe we
And I
should
think our screen share got a little
I can
adjusted.
see that, yeah. Why don't we continue with the next question, if there are other questions, while we try to figure out what's going on with Ruby's screen.
Yeah. In being creatively responsible, do you see any potential with enforcing the public trust doctrine? Because the public does own the water, and not the companies or utilities or anybody else. And it looks to me like a real opportunity to be responsible and reasonable, instead of racing around and being reactionary like everybody seems to.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, the public trust doctrine, I think, comes up when we are talking about tidelands trusts, or it's been used in California water in a couple instances, particularly around the coast, protecting California's coast, protecting San Francisco Bay, protecting the Salton Sea, protecting Mono Lake. So these areas that relate to a concept of law that comes from ancient Rome, and is basically the idea that the government has a public trust to be able to safeguard natural resources. I don't see that being in conflict with the way EBMUD is the steward of our natural resources.
Well, if you give it away, though, it's a problem. Like the California Public Utilities Commission is giving away the public asset, well, for example, to the California American Water Company in Monterey County. And I think it's a real issue.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the public trust was used in the 1880s to stop hydraulic mining, and in the conversion of the economy of California from mining to agriculture. And essentially, the farmers didn't buy the water from the miners. It changed to them. But now the farmers, it seems, want the information economy to buy the water from them as the economy changes to an information economy. And it seems like a cookie cutter case that was useful before and has been useful many times and is just being resisted because lawyers don't like it.
Well, some lawyers like it. The last time it was used on a grand scale was when the California Supreme Court, shortly before Chief Justice Rose Bird was recalled by the voters, that the Supreme Court did hold that Mono Lake needed to be preserved for environmental protection, and not be drained for by the municipal users in Los Angeles. So that was the holding of the court. They used the public trust doctrine in that innovative way where it hadn't really been used in that kind of context before. And we've heard a lot of talk about the public trust doctrine being used for climate in the news lately. We've also heard it being talked about for the Delta. And I don't think there's any question that the public trust doctrine applies to the Delta. I think the question is, how is it used? Because it's a very a simple doctrine that we would that needs to be applied. So
but I think there was a problem when the Howard Hughes estate didn't want the public trust to apply to them. And it was argued before the US Supreme Court in 1987 by Warren Christopher and Zoe Baird. And they came up with a very innovative argument that Rehnquist used in a very racist and unreasonable way to say that because his property was the subject of a pre-statehood land grant, that because of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, if something so onerous as the California Public Trust would be applied to Howard Hughes, he had to have notice. And that made everybody absolutely sure that the public trust didn't apply. But then when the guy from Sun Microsystems tried to apply the same argument at Martins Beach, it didn't work. And is California learning anything from legal history?
Well, I think one big difference is that, federal common law is read very narrowly, even though, the whole limitation, the whole limiting factor for federal common law is this originalism concept of law that was in effect at the time of the founding. And the public trust doctrine dates back to the time of the Romans, certainly, the time of the founding.
Yeah, but it's state law. It's not federal.
Yeah. Right. Well, so you were mentioning that one case by Justice Rehnquist, and we have the kids' climate case that's looking for justice for future generations using the public trust doctrine, and that's an interesting case to be following too.
Yeah, but they're trying to lose it. The legal profession is seemingly fighting against it, with groups such as the Sierra Club, the Planning and Conservation League, and Surfrider Foundation signed on to a settlement with California American Water that would have given away the public trust. And it seems that they made the decision that that was okay as long as their legal fees could get paid. And that's a problem.
I think it's challenging to be an environmental advocate in our courts right now. We have a lot of competing interests. And when you're in front of a judge that could rule completely against you, the idea of how do you make sure that we have protection of what's adequate becomes very challenging. We need to make sure that we are getting our decision makers to appreciate the value of our natural resources. I look at the quality of indicators in the Delta right now, and I get very concerned. to make sure that we have a fully functional estuary of delta smelt and fish that go, up and down that food web, to make sure that they're able to get to habitat up, throughout all of the tributary rivers in California. I think it's a shame that EBMUD is supporting about half of the fish that are flowing through the estuary right now through our hatchery program. It's great that we are doing it, but I wonder where are all the other fish, because the Mccullum River is only about 2% of the water flow that goes into the Delta, yet we're supplying 50% of the fish. That really tells me that we are not providing a healthy estuary that's able to support the fish naturally spawning in other parts of the watershed.
Absolutely. And everybody would agree that, things don't have value. People confer value on things. And in the United States, even money is not a thing with automatic value, because we protect its value with deposit insurance. And that's been the law since, since the Federal Reserve Act time. And, it's just, why don't we use our law rather than, and there I see the legal profession as the main problem, because they want to have no limits on legal fees. And they argue that that is in the interests of society. But there are limits on legal fees. And just because one industry wants to have unlimited pricing shouldn't mean that we go that way. And I think that,
Yeah, at that point, you've gone beyond the case that I really understand about, but thanks for raising some of these issues. I think the public trust represents a certain set of values that needs to be taken into consideration when we're making Delta policy. Right now, there's a regulatory proceeding happening by the State Water Resources Control Board that would regulate Delta flows. The administration has been trying to steer agencies towards a voluntary agreement that would settle the flows that should go to the Delta. So that's a very important process to be following, because the flows that are going to the Delta, not just from EBMUD and SFPUC, the Delta exporters, all of these interests, how much water is flowing into the Delta is really a question of success or crash of the estuary.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So there's a request to talk about recycled water projects that could help reduce use of river water. Yes, so we have a current facility that has been in existence for a while at our East Bay Shore. We call it our East Bay Shore Recycled Water Plant. It's at the main wastewater treatment plant by the maze. What's been a little challenging is getting the chemistry to work at that facility. So we have been deploying recycled water for use in Caltrans medians and other turf watering that's along that corridor. And that corridor goes pretty much up Highway 80 and a little bit south from the maze. So that's what we're doing with that. We also have some pipe connections into some of the newer office buildings in downtown Oakland. What we're concerned about is making sure that if we're going to require expansion, when a new building pops up in our service area, we actually, in our water supply assessments, we will require that building accept recycled water from our project. Before we actually flip the switch and do that, we're making sure that the water quality is of the type that will not be corrosive to the pipes inside the building. So we're working through some chemistry issues on that. We have some other recycled water that we're doing that displaces the freshwater use of the refineries. So we have several refineries in our service area that, if we didn't build recycled water, would be using a tremendous amount of potable water. This is the Chevron refinery in Richmond, the Phillips 66 facility in Rodeo. Those are in our service territory. And each of them, use a total amount of in the range of about 10 million gallons a day each. So to prevent them from using potable water, we've constructed recycled water facilities that displace about 70% of their water to become recycled water instead of potable. So they still use a lot of potable water, but it's drastically reduced because of our recycled water program. And we're looking at some other smaller facilities. The Berkeley Country Club is very interested, some of the cemeteries in our service area. So we've moved past large industrial uses, and we're starting to look at how can we do something smaller, of a smaller scale on sites that have a lot of watering and would be compatible with a recycled water use. Carol.
Have you heard of the Idaho Maryland mine in Nevada County? That's a Canadian company that is wanting to do a mine up there, and there's a lot of toxics if they start doing mining, probably for gold, that goes downstream. I don't know if it affects our watershed for EBMUD or not, but do you know anything about any of that?
Mm-hmm. Eventually, almost every river starts to affect the delta at some level. So I would be surprised if Nevada County, I don't know that particular site or that river, but so much of our watershed flows back into the delta. At that small of a scale, considering all of the water that flows and how many miles it would be flowing, I'm not sure if it would have a measurable impact by the time it gets to the delta. As I mentioned, our water supply is very protected. So 90% of our water comes from the Mccullum River, and almost all of our drinking water comes from the Mccullum River, and that is protected. And we get some supplemental supply from the Delta and blend it during dry years. So that's where we do have to pay attention to some of those risks, where we are very fortunate to have a watershed where we don't have to worry about microplastics like some other communities do. We do have to worry about those getting into the bay, but we don't have to worry about it in our drinking water. We don't have to worry about sewage and wastewater that's upstream of us. We don't have to worry about triclosan or other hormone disruptors. So there's so many aspects of water quality where if we were depending on an area that had a wastewater discharge upstream of us, we would have to be concerned about the quality of that wastewater cleanup and all of the microcontaminants that are getting into that discharge. Fortunately, we don't have to worry about it in our drinking water, but we must be good stewards of San Francisco Bay. And so this year, I'm proud that EBMUD is an early supporter of much of the legislation to get PFAS, those forever chemicals, out of our environment. At least stop producing new ones and stop distributing new ones. We need to be thinking about this and protecting our bay and our water discharge.
So I think that particular place that Carol was discussing was actually, it was a mine for a really long time, and then it was just abandoned by the miners, and they left a lot of toxins in the valley. And so it's not used for anything right now because nobody wants to go there except for the deer and the whatever small animals. So I think it's just an example of a case where this would be hard to deal with if it starts to get down into the Delta or into this Sacramento River.
They have some sort of EIR coming up later this month, and they were hoping to get some support from Sierra Club or some people down here in fighting to not have the mining company take it over, because they're very worried about the water quality and the effect on the environment.
There's another one of these Canadian things. I don't know if it's the same company, but they're trying to build one that's down on the Imperial Valley. Down where Los Angeles drained the entire lake and it's gone, and all that's left is all the toxins in the base of the well, let's see, of the former lake. And they're expecting to put in a new mine system that will probably disturb all this. So it's a case of people coming from the outside and not actually valuing our resources.
Anyway, maybe we could go on if we don't have any more questions on this and talk about the IPCC and the war and other issues.
Sure. Let me start that by just introducing a little bit of perspective about where we were, where we are, taking into account what the Climate Action Tracker says about the pledges going into COP26, which are woefully inadequate to be able to get us towards 1.5 degrees limit on global warming average temperatures relative to pre-industrial times. So the IPCC has told us for about a decade now, particularly since Paris in 2015, that 1.5 degrees Celsius is the maximum that they can really have a high degree of confidence of limiting the impacts of global climate change to impacts that we can adapt to. So what the newest report really shows us is that once we start to cross 1.5, and especially once we get closer to 2 or beyond 2, we will start to see impacts that we simply can't adapt to or reverse. Reversal is a matter of either negative emissions, which is carries a whole set of technological questions and controversies. But anything short of that means 10,000 years minimum until we this is repaired. So it's for all practical purposes permanent to have global temperature rise. We are currently facing a 1.1 degree world right now. So that's where we are right now at this point in time, and it's been rapidly increasing. We're getting dangerously close to 1.5 degrees. And from perspective, where we were going into Paris, it seemed that the pledges that were on the table at the time were sufficient to get us to limit global warming to about 3.4 degrees Celsius. So in Paris, that was where we were headed, 3.4 degrees. And if all of the ambitious statements in Paris came to fruition, then there was a chance of limiting global warming to 2.6 degrees Celsius. So that's where things were in Paris. So comparing that to now, things are looking a little bit better. The equivalent of those numbers is if all of the formal pledges that are nationally determined contributions that were announced going into Glasgow were to occur, and those are legally binding in terms of the reports that they make. They're politically binding in terms of actually carrying them out. But those reports, I think, are generally conservative by countries and should be reliable in actually getting carried out. But those pledges really only would limit global warming to about 2.8 degrees Celsius. So maybe about 2.6 degrees Celsius. So that's what the group Climate Action Tracker has assessed the pledges that are on the table going into Glasgow, that's what they equate to. Still not good enough. On the bright side, there were a lot of ambitious announcements. So the Beyond Oil and Gas Coalition was announced. There were I forget if it was the G7 or the G20 made a very bold announcement to phase out of coal. So there were many declarations that were made by different groups of countries to phase out or phase down different types of fuel, fossil fuel. So if those bold pledges all happened over the next 10 to 15 years, along the course of time that those pledges were announced for, then global climate change could be limited to 1.8 degrees Celsius. And that's a very hopeful statement. That is probably the most hopeful, optimistic possibility of protecting our climate from the devastating effects of climate change that I had heard all year. It's still a long way because it really depends on these non-binding pledges that were declared by groups of countries with really no national law in effect in any of those states to actually make this happen. These are really reach goals. But optimistically, I think we can only look at it as momentum that has to be secured, that has to carry us forward to say, well, this means that we're not doing it alone as a environmentally concerned community in the Bay Area, in the United States, that we need to demand that bold action to move beyond dirty fuels. And that's why I'm proud that we have gotten dirty fuels out of our electricity grid. We are looking at alternatives to internal combustion engines locally. We need to be pushing our state government to go even stronger than just the idea on the table right now is banning the sale of new internal combustion engines by 2035. We need to pull that into 2030. We need to be putting more money into incentives to replace the internal combustion engine vehicles with electric vehicles and power that with a green grid. We know what the solutions are. It's just a question of does the United States and does California have the commitment to lead? And I think we have leaders who want that, but it's going to take a lot more speaking up to get that to happen. It's going to also take international climate finance. So it's one thing for the United States to move steadily along the path of technology transformation, which I think a lot of United States policy and investments have, those have been some of the most successful policy decisions to transform these vehicle technologies and clean electricity technologies, that those have been successful efforts. I think we're seeing that happen with heavy duty vehicles right now. But we need to put our money where our mouth is and help developing countries skip the dirty phase of development. We didn't see a COP decision that said phase out of fossil fuels because a developing country, particularly India, blocked it, saying that they wanted to phase down of fossil fuels. And why should we blame them when it's not clear where they're going to get the climate finance from? How are they going to phase out fossil fuel if the developed countries that have benefited from burning fossil fuel for centuries are not actually stepping up to the plate to help a country that is poor and is currently only using 2 metric tons per capita compared to the United States' 20 metric tons per capita of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. By comparison, California is much more efficient. We're around 5 metric tons per capita, closer to Europe. But that comparison is stark. Where we need to be working together for these solutions. So that's my introduction about where the science is, what the path for success is, and the big takeaways from the recent IPCC report, I think, show us that that these impacts are serious, and they push the environment beyond the point where humans can adapt. The IPCC provided for, I think, the first time the limits of our comfort zone of what adaptation really means. Adaptation means famine and figuring out how to adapt to famine and that adapt to mass drought. These are not compatible concepts. You can't adapt to that. We're going to be thinking about what we ought to be thinking about as refugees, but it's legally controversial when you're being persecuted by famine, and that's not a legal concept that really lends itself to acknowledgement about climate migration. So this is a warning sign that that there's going to be major disruptions in much of the global South, and we still have a narrow window to do something about it. I'll stop there.
Well, I wanted to ask you, doesn't that seem like
Wait a second, Mike, just a second. Ruby was going to ask a question before and she couldn't, so let's let her go first.
This may be really, well, I'm not sure how credible it is, but I read a commentary in East Bay Times about the weather predictions being kind of uncertain these days because this author said the algorithms that are necessary for accurate weather prediction had not been updated in 2014 as they should have been. And I just wonder, whether you had heard anything about that. And of course, it may not have any effect on the, it may not have any significance for, of course, the climate change predictions. But have you heard about the weather prediction being unreliable?
I haven't seen anything specific to our traditional meteorology projections in that week to 2 week horizon. Of course, we've seen long-term projections about the potential disruption to the whole jet stream. If the Pacific jet stream is disrupted, this could create over the course of the century an ice age kind of environment for North America. Which is, but it's very complicated. The weather is very complicated, and having these delicate systems interfered with could create very significant disruption, and it's already creating the stronger hurricanes, stronger storms, atmospheric rivers that put pressure on our flooding systems and our food systems.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, I was thinking about this offers an even greater adaptive capacity with public trust, because if public trust and viable resource systems are already the law, why don't we acknowledge it and use our law to do the collaboration that is so obviously needed in the climate situation?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of political will. It's a matter of interpreting the public trust doctrine for these changing times and these changing situations. And we're seeing that unfold in the kids' climate case, where kids who aren't all kids anymore, because this case has been going on for quite some time, had received a very favorable ruling from a district judge in Washington, and who found that the public trust doctrine applies to climate. The Ninth Circuit did not agree on a public trust doctrine, but did agree on standing. Did not throw the case out on standing. Which I think does leave another day to have these discussions. The case is still on appeal. The remedy is being refashioned, and I think what that case allows is the opportunity for for kids that are suing the federal government. It creates a platform for the kids to enter into settlement discussions with the executive branch. And maybe that provides a platform for the executive branch to take executive actions that are allowed. That's the way I see that case going. But we did not get a good decision by that Ninth Circuit panel.
Well, the people who are teaching the public trust doctrine, the law schools, take Berkeley Law, for example, now has a war criminal teaching constitutional law, and the university council has said that there's nothing that the university community can do about that. And that's a really interesting thing, just coming from a university council, to absolutely stop any discussion because he says there's nothing we can do about it. And now the university's done this whole thing with the CEQA lawsuit. I think there's a real intellectual and ethical problem right here in our city about how we obey the law.
Does anybody else have any questions? We have about time for one or two more potentially. Do you have anything to say? I mean, it should be somewhat obvious to all of us, but with this war going on and the destruction and the no water and the rebuilding and what are the effects of that in terms of trying to fight climate change? Isn't that pushing us so far backwards?
I think so. You know, I think climate change is so dependent on international collaboration. And I think that the development of war here has, I think, brought back, you know, a situation where international collaboration is really harmed. And it brings us back to, you know, reliance on fossil fuels for military capabilities. It also brings far to the surface our lack of resilience to be able to move off of fossil fuels. You know, there was part of the slow pace of sanctions against Russia has been over dependence of fossil fuels, particularly for Europe. You know, so there's a rallying cry happening in the climate community that the best way to fight the international, you know, to put pressure on Russia in this situation is to move away from fossil fuels. I think that's particularly true in Europe right now, where they're dependent on. I believe, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, it might be as much as 40% of their gas is sourced from Russia. So that I think is a big opportunity where, you know, if they want to be resilient and to not be vulnerable to that pressure, we would need to be independent and to have renewable sources. It's been a close call in the United States as we see reactions to the increases in prices at the pump. You know, calls to give a gas tax holiday that wouldn't necessarily go into working people's pockets, but would take away our ability to fund transit, would take away our ability to fund, you know, good solutions. So, you know, I think some of these discussions need to be had, and you know, and I think we see members of the Republican Party capitalizing on this as an opportunity to rehash these old battles about Keystone XL and other pipelines that have been abandoned by the Obama and Biden administrations. You know, rebuilding those pipelines is not going to do a thing for gas prices this month. It's just a political agenda. So I think we can't separate, you know, the international relations and you know, the trade of oil and gas. And I think the sooner we can get off of dirty fuels, the sooner we can move closer towards global peace and security too.
Andy, we thank you. On very short notice, this was terrific. We covered so many things, and it was really an excellent perspective on lots of things.
Thanks for having me, and I
Living
welcome
in interesting times.
and I welcome people to contact me by email. I'm putting my email in the chat, and I would be glad to stay in touch about upcoming events and presentations, as well as answer any of your questions that you didn't get to ask today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.